Have you ever stood at the edge of a truth so profound that something within you whispers a warning? A truth that, once heard, once truly understood, dissolves the very foundation upon which you've built your entire existence. I know that feeling. I remember the exact moment when I stumbled upon a teaching that shattered every certainty I had carefully constructed over decades. It wasn't dramatic. No lightning struck. No angels descended. It was simply a quiet realization that everything I had been taught about reality, about myself, about the nature of existence itself, was fundamentally incomplete. And here's what terrified me most. I knew that once I crossed that threshold of understanding, there would be no returning to the comfortable ignorance I had lived in. The door behind me would close forever. Perhaps you're standing at that same threshold now, feeling that strange mixture of anticipation and terror. You've sensed for so long that something crucial has been hidden from you, not by some external conspiracy, but by the very structure of consensus reality itself. And now, as manlyphall spent his entire life revealing, you're about to discover why the ancient mystery schools guarded certain teachings behind veils of symbolism and ritual, not because they were cruel or elitist, but because some truths, once unleashed in an unprepared mind, cannot be unlearned. They transform you irreversibly. They burn away the illusions that have kept you safe, comfortable, and fundamentally asleep. In the next minutes, I'm going to share with you what those ancient initiates discovered in the depths of their contemplation. A truth so simple that the mind initially rejects it, so obvious that we spend lifetimes overlooking it, so powerful that it has the capacity to dissolve every problem you've ever struggled with, not by solving them, but by revealing they never existed in the way you thought they did. This isn't motivation. This isn't inspiration. This is transmission of something the mystics called gnosis, direct knowing that bypasses the analytical mind and strikes at the core of your being. Once you hear this, truly hear it, your relationship with everything will fundamentally shift. There's no going back. Are you ready? Let's begin with a question that may seem absurdly simple. Who is reading these words right now? Your immediate answer is likely your name, your identity, the story you've been telling yourself about who you are. But stay with me here, because this is where the ancient teachings begin to pull back the first veil. That identity, that sense of being a separate individual navigating through a world of other separate individuals, is not what you are. It's what you're experiencing. And this distinction, this recognition that you are not the character in the story but the awareness witnessing the story unfold, is the first crack in the cosmic egg that has contained your consciousness. Manlyphall dedicated his masterwork, The Secret Teachings of All Ages, to unpacking this singular truth that runs through every authentic spiritual tradition. The Hindus called it Atman, recognizing Brahman. The Buddhists spoke of it as seeing through the illusion of separate self. The Christian mystics like Meister Eckhart described it as the eye with which you see God being the same eye with which God sees you. The Sufis sang of the beloved realizing it was searching for itself. Every genuine mystical revelation across all cultures and epochs points to this one shattering recognition that what you truly are has never been confined to the boundaries of your body, your thoughts, or your personal history. You are the infinite awareness in which all of these phenomena appear, play out, and dissolve. But here's where it gets uncomfortable, where the teaching begins to strip away not just intellectual concepts, but the very ground beneath your feet. If you are this infinite awareness, this consciousness that witnesses all experience without being limited by any experience, then what does that make your problems? Your struggles, your desperate search for meaning, purpose, validation? They become recognized as movements within consciousness itself, not your movements, not problems that belong to you, but spontaneous arisings in the field of awareness that you are. Consider how the ocean doesn't struggle with its waves. The waves are expressions of the ocean, temporary formations that arise and subside, but the ocean itself remains unchanged by their appearance. You've been living as though you were a single wave, desperately trying to become a better wave, a more enlightened wave, a wave that finally figures out how to stop being tossed about by forces beyond its control. But the teaching that cannot be unheard is this: you were never the wave. You've always been the ocean, mistakenly identifying with a temporary formation within yourself. The ancient Hermetic axiom states, as above, so below, as within, so without. This wasn't meant to be a poetic metaphor. It was pointing to the fractal nature of consciousness, the way that the macrocosm and microcosm mirror each other perfectly, because they are, in essence, the same thing viewed from different scales. When you look at your life, you see a timeline, a narrative arc from birth toward death filled with challenges to overcome and goals to achieve. But this linear perception is itself a construct, a way that infinite consciousness has chosen to experience itself through the lens of time and limitation. From the perspective of what you truly are, beyond the identification with form, there is no timeline. There is only this eternal now, this present moment that is always fresh, always complete, always whole. Every moment you've ever experienced has only ever occurred in the now. Memory is experienced now. Anticipation of the future is experienced now. This present awareness is the only reality, and everything else is a story consciousness tells itself to create the experience of journey, of becoming, of spiritual evolution. And here's where the teaching becomes almost unbearable in its implications. If there is only this present moment, if you are the infinite awareness in which all experience arises, then what you've been seeking, your entire spiritual quest, your desperate search for enlightenment or awakening or peace, is consciousness seeking itself. It's like the eye trying to see itself, or a knife trying to cut itself. It's a cosmic game of hide and seek where the divine has hidden itself so thoroughly within form, within the character you believe yourself to be, that it has genuinely forgotten its own nature. And the search for truth, for meaning, for awakening, is simply the mechanism by which it remembers. You are not on a path toward enlightenment. Enlightenment is what you are, playing at being unenlightened, playing at seeking itself. The Buddha sitting under the Bodhi tree didn't become enlightened. He simply stopped pretending not to be. He saw through the hypnosis of separation and recognized that what he had been seeking through years of extreme asceticism and meditation was always already present as the very awareness doing the seeking. The Taoist masters expressed this with characteristic simplicity. The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. Yet here we are, attempting to speak it, knowing full well that words can only point toward truth, never capture it. Language operates in the realm of duality, of subject and object, of this and that. But what we're discussing exists prior to duality, prior to the split of consciousness into observer and observed. It is the ground of being itself, the source from which both poles of every paradox emerge. This is why spiritual teachings often seem contradictory. They tell you to make effort, then tell you to surrender effort. They say you must purify yourself, then reveal you are already pure. They encourage you to seek truth, then declare you are truth itself. These aren't contradictions when understood correctly. They're descriptions of different stages in consciousness's journey back to recognizing itself. In the beginning, effort is required because the hypnosis is so deep that without active engagement, the momentum of conditioning simply carries you along, perpetuating the dream of separation. You need practices, disciplines, teachings that begin to loosen the grip of identification with form. But eventually, you reach a threshold where the seeker itself is recognized as part of the seeking. The one trying to wake up is discovered to be a character in the dream, not separate from the dream. And at that recognition, seeking spontaneously falls away, not because you achieve some goal, but because you see that there was never anyone separate who could achieve anything. There is only consciousness eternally complete, playing all the roles in its own cosmic drama. Manlyphall understood that this teaching needed to be approached carefully, wrapped in layers of symbolism and allegory, because the unprepared mind rebels against it. The ego structure, that sense of being a separate autonomous entity, is invested in its own survival. It will defend itself against any teaching that threatens its primacy. This is why the mystery schools required years of preparation, ritual initiations, and gradual unveiling of truth. They were systematically dismantling the psychological structures that kept consciousness bound to identification with form, while simultaneously building the capacity to remain functional in the world, even as the illusion of separation dissolved. In our modern era, we've largely lost this understanding. We treat spiritual awakening like collecting information, like adding knowledge to our mental library. We attend workshops, read books, follow teachers, accumulating concepts about enlightenment, while the fundamental recognition remains perpetually out of reach. Because it's not something that can be accumulated or achieved. It's what you are, Prior to all accumulation, prior to all achievement, think about your experience right now in this very moment. Before you name it, before you analyze it, before you judge it as good or bad, pleasant or unpleasant, there is simply raw experiencing happening. Colors, sounds, sensations, thoughts arising and dissolving in a field of awareness that has no boundaries, no center, no periphery. That awareness isn't located in your head, isn't contained by your body. The body is an appearance in awareness. The sense of being located behind your eyes, looking out at an external world, is itself an appearance in awareness. Even the thought I am aware right now is just another appearance, another arising in the infinite space of consciousness that you are. This is what the ancient teachers meant when they spoke of emptiness, of the void, of the formless ground of being. It's not a thing that exists. It's the no thing from which all things emerge. It's pure potentiality, pure presence, pure beingness that takes on the appearance of forms while remaining forever untouched by those forms. Like space isn't affected by the objects that appear in it, like a mirror isn't changed by the images it reflects, awareness remains pristine regardless of what experiences arise within it. And now we arrive at the teaching that truly has no return path. If you are this awareness, if you are the consciousness in which all of reality appears, then what you've been calling your life, your problems, your struggles, your victories, your relationships, your entire personal history, are movements of yourself within yourself. There's no one outside of this having these experiences. There's no separate you dealing with a hostile universe. There is only the universe experiencing itself through the lens of apparent individuality. The conflicts you experience, the sense of being at odds with life, the feeling that things should be different than they are, all of these arise from the fundamental misidentification of yourself as a separate fragment, trying to survive in a vast and often threatening cosmos. But from the recognition of what you truly are, conflict becomes impossible. How can there be conflict when there's no one separate to conflict with? How can there be problems when the one who would have problems is recognized as a temporary character in consciousness's play? This doesn't mean challenges don't arise. The body still experiences pain. Emotions still move through. Thoughts still come and go. But the relationship to all of it fundamentally transforms. Instead of being the victim of circumstance, you recognize yourself as the space in which circumstances appear. Instead of being buffeted by the storms of life, you see that you are the vast sky in which storms come and go, never truly touching what you are. The alchemists encoded this in their elaborate symbolism. The transformation of lead into gold wasn't about literal metallurgy. It was describing the process by which base consciousness, identified with form and limitation, recognizes its true nature as the divine gold of pure awareness. The great work, the magnum opus, is simply waking up from the dream of separation. And like any dream, once you wake up, you can't go back to believing it was real in the way you did before. You might remember the dream, might even have emotional responses to memories of it. But there's a fundamental knowing that it was all a construction of consciousness, all a play of awareness exploring itself. This is what the mystics meant when they spoke of liberation, of moksha, of enlightenment, not some special state to be achieved, but the recognition of what has always been true. You are free because you've never been bound except in imagination. You are whole because there was never anything separate that could be fragmented. You are home because there was never anywhere else to be. I'm going to pause here for a moment, because I sense something important is happening as you listen to these words. Perhaps you're feeling that tightness in your throat, that emotion that rises when a profound truth touches something deep within you. You've been living in this cycle of seeking and separation for so long, haven't you? How many times have you asked yourself in silence, why, even after so many spiritual practices, do I still feel fundamentally incomplete? You're not alone in this feeling. In fact, this is the exact moment where many stop, thinking they'll never achieve the awakening the masters describe. I want you to do something simple but profoundly powerful right now. Share in the comments, I am the awareness in which all experience arises. This isn't just a beautiful phrase. It's a declaration of recognition, a rupture in the pattern of identification that has kept consciousness asleep. And something extraordinary happens when we express this in words. First, you recognize this fundamental pattern of existence. Second, you help countless others who are reading the comments at this exact moment. People who thought they were the only ones feeling this longing for awakening. Your comment might be the confirmation someone needed to see today, the reminder that they're not alone, that there's a truth beyond seeking. So please share now. This small act could be the crack in the cosmic shell that separates you from remembering who you truly are. Let's go deeper into what this recognition actually means for your lived experience. Because here's where many spiritual teachings become abstract and disconnected from the messy reality of human existence. It's one thing to understand intellectually that you are consciousness itself. It's another thing entirely to live from that recognition moment by moment. The gap between intellectual understanding and embodied realization is where most seekers spend decades wandering. They collect insights, have peak experiences during meditation or plant medicine ceremonies, read countless books about enlightenment, yet somehow the fundamental transformation remains elusive. Why? Because knowing about water doesn't quench thirst. Knowing about enlightenment doesn't awaken you. The recognition must become your living reality, not just another concept in your spiritual portfolio. This is where Hall's teachings become profoundly practical despite their esoteric wrapping. He understood that transformation requires not just new information, but a complete reorganization of your relationship with reality. You must begin to see through the habitual patterns of mind that continuously regenerate the illusion of separation. Watch what happens in your direct experience. A thought arises. Before you've recognized it as a thought, there's a split second where there's just the pure arising of mental content. Then, almost instantaneously, there's identification. My thought. I'm thinking this. And with that identification comes a whole cascade of related thoughts and emotions. If it's a pleasant thought, you want more. If it's unpleasant, you want to get rid of it. If it's a spiritual thought, you judge yourself as progressing. If it's a mundane or negative thought, you worry you're backsliding. But notice what happens if you catch that split second before identification. There's just thinking happening. No thinker. Just like when you look at a tree, there's seeing happening, but no one separate doing the seeing. The seer and the seen arise together as one unified experiencing. This is what Buddha meant by anatta, no self. Not that you don't exist, but that the sense of being a separate autonomous self doing and experiencing things is a construction, a habit of perception that gets reinforced moment by moment through identification. When that identification is seen through, not as a concept but as a living recognition, everything becomes lighter, more spacious, more effortless. Life continues to happen, but there's no one carrying the burden of making it happen. Challenges arise, but there's no one separate from the challenge who must solve it. Joy and sorrow move through, but there's no one claiming ownership of these experiences. The Vedantic tradition describes this state as sahaja samadhi, the natural state, not some altered state of consciousness you have to strain to achieve and maintain, but the recognition of what consciousness naturally is when not filtered through the lens of personal identity. You know this state intimately even if you haven't recognized it. Every night in deep dreamless sleep, personal identity dissolves completely. There's no sense of being a separate self. No problems, no seeking, no suffering. Pure consciousness resting in itself, without any object of awareness. Then upon waking, the sense of being someone returns. The world reconstructs itself, and the dream of separation begins again. But here's the crucial point. What you are in deep sleep isn't different from what you are now. The awareness that exists without any content in deep sleep is the same awareness in which all your waking experiences arise. The only difference is the presence or absence of identification with content. In deep sleep, consciousness rests in itself with no objects. In waking and dreaming, consciousness takes on the appearance of objects, of experiences, of a world, and then mysteriously identifies with one particular appearance within that world and calls it me. The entire spiritual journey is simply the process of consciousness recognizing that this identification was arbitrary, was optional, was never necessary for experiencing to occur. The Christian mystic Paul Tillich spoke of this as the ground of being, that which exists before and beneath all conceptual constructions. In more contemporary terms, you could say it's the isness that precedes any particular form that isness takes. Right now, there is existence happening. That's undeniable. But what is it that exists? If you strip away all the labels, all the names, all the stories, what remains? Pure presence, pure being, pure consciousness aware of itself. And here's the profound recognition. that pure consciousness isn't separate from anything it experiences. The universe isn't outside consciousness looking at it. The universe is consciousness, knowing itself through infinite forms and perspectives. You're not a fragment of consciousness, you're not even a focus of consciousness. You are consciousness itself, temporarily contracted around the focal point called this body-mind organism, creating the convincing illusion that consciousness is located here, looking out at everything else, which is separate. But in truth, there is no here separate from there. There is only the unified field of awareness in which all apparent locations arise. When you begin to live from this recognition, something remarkable happens to the way you engage with life. Problems don't necessarily disappear, but the one who would be overwhelmed by problems does. You find yourself responding to situations with a natural intelligence that doesn't require the laborious process of the personal self trying to figure everything out. It's like the difference between a computer trying to solve a problem through sequential processing versus a neural network that processes holistically and arrives at solutions without knowing how. When consciousness isn't contracted around personal identity, when it's not filtered through the bottleneck of me and my story, it has access to a vastly greater intelligence. Not your intelligence, but the intelligence of consciousness itself. The same intelligence that grew your body from a single cell, that coordinates trillions of processes every second to keep you alive, that orchestrates the dance of galaxies and the quantum fluctuations of subatomic particles. You begin to trust life in a way that's impossible when you believe you're a separate entity that must control and manipulate circumstances to survive. You recognize that what you call your life is actually life itself, consciousness itself, exploring itself through this particular node of awareness. The Taoist concept of Wu Wei, effortless action, emerges naturally from this recognition. It's not about being passive or inactive. It's about action arising from the totality of what you are, rather than from the contracted sense of personal doership. Think about how a river flows. It doesn't have to try to flow. It doesn't have meetings to plan its route. It doesn't worry about whether it's flowing correctly. It simply responds to the landscape, to gravity, to the forces acting upon it, and in that response it carves canyons, nourishes ecosystems, and eventually finds its way to the ocean. That's natural action, spontaneous and appropriate to the moment, without the interference of a separate controller trying to make it happen according to some preconceived plan. When you recognize what you are, action becomes like this. Not yours, not mine, but simply the natural expression of consciousness responding to itself, playing with itself, exploring itself through infinite variations. Now, let's address what might be the most difficult aspect of this teaching, the reason why there truly is no going back once you've heard it. The recognition of what you are doesn't necessarily make your life easier in the conventional sense. It doesn't guarantee wealth, health, perfect relationships, or freedom from difficult circumstances. What it does is remove the fundamental suffering that comes from believing you're a separate self, at odds with reality. The Buddha made this distinction between pain and suffering. Pain is inevitable. It's part of the human experience. Stubbing your toe hurts. Losing someone you love brings grief. Physical illness creates discomfort. These are natural responses of the body-mind organism. But suffering, the psychological anguish that compounds pain, the story of why this shouldn't be happening to me, the comparison to how things should be different, the resistance to what is, all of that is created by the sense of being a separate self that life is happening to rather than happening as. When that separate self is recognized as an appearance in consciousness rather than what you fundamentally are, suffering can still arise as a momentary pattern, but it doesn't stick. It doesn't create the deep existential crisis that it did when you believed it was happening to a real, solid, separate you. This is what the ancient mystery schools meant by initiation into the greater mysteries. The lesser mysteries dealt with purification, with ethics, with developing concentration and insight. But the greater mysteries revealed the ultimate truth, that the initiate and the divine, the seeker and the sought, consciousness and its content, have never been separate. The entire journey was consciousness playing at forgetting itself so it could experience the joy of remembering. And once remembered, once truly seen, the game is revealed for what it is. Not a cosmic joke exactly, more like a divine play, a lila as the Hindus call it, where consciousness dances with itself for the sheer pleasure of experiencing, of being, of knowing itself through infinite perspectives. You are one of those perspectives. Not a mistake, not a fallen soul needing redemption, not a limited being striving to become unlimited. You are the unlimited pretending to be limited, the eternal playing in the field of time, the infinite wearing the costume of finitude, and the teaching that has no return is simply this. Once you recognize the costume for what it is, you can never again fully believe in it the way you did before. You might still wear it. You might still play the role. But there's a knowing, a seeing, a recognition that never disappears, that changes everything while changing nothing at all. And so we arrive at the final paradox, the ultimate koan that can't be resolved by thinking but only by direct recognition. Nothing I've said here is true. These words are fingers pointing at the moon, not the moon itself. The truth cannot be spoken because truth exists before language, before concepts, before the split of consciousness into knower and known. Yet something in you recognizes what's being pointed toward, not your mind, which may be confused or resistant, or trying desperately to grasp and own this understanding, but a deeper knowing, a silent recognition that exists beneath the surface noise of thought. That recognition is what you are, not something you have, not something you'll achieve through more practice or more study, but what you've always been, prior to all seeking, prior to all spiritual journeys, prior to the very sense of being someone who could seek or journey. You are the awareness reading these words, the consciousness in which these concepts arise and dissolve, the presence that has witnessed every moment of your life without ever being touched or changed by those moments. You are the unchanging background against which all change appears, the eternal now in which all time unfolds, the infinite space in which all form dances. And you've never been anything else. You've never actually forgotten what you are. You've only been so absorbed in the play of form that you temporarily overlooked the formless awareness you've always been. This message, this teaching, this transmission is simply an invitation to remember, not to become something you're not, but to recognize what you've always been. And once recognized, once truly seen, there's no going back to the innocence of pure identification. The dream continues, but there's a lucidity now, a knowing that permeates everything, that transforms suffering into passing weather, that reveals the sacred in the mundane, that finds the eternal in every fleeting moment. What you've just encountered isn't information to be filed away in your mental database. It's not another spiritual concept to add to your collection. What you've touched here, if only for a moment, is the living truth that mystics across all traditions have pointed toward with different words, different symbols, different practices, but always the same recognition at the core. The recognition that you are not who you thought you were, that what you truly are cannot be threatened, cannot be lost, cannot fail or succeed, because it exists prior to all such dualities. Every master, every sage, every enlightened being throughout history hasn't achieved something you lack. They've simply stopped pretending not to be what they are. They've allowed the hypnosis of separation to dissolve and recognize themselves as the consciousness in which all of reality appears. And that same recognition is available to you, not someday after more years of practice, but now, in this very moment, because what you are has never changed, never been absent, never required anything to become complete. The search for enlightenment is consciousness seeking itself, and the end of seeking is simply the recognition that what was being sought was always doing the seeking. There's nowhere to get to, because there's nowhere you've ever left. There's nothing to achieve because you've never been incomplete. There's no one to become because what you are exists before and beyond all becoming. This is the teaching that has no return. Once heard, truly heard, not just intellectually understood but recognized at the core of your being, everything shifts, not because anything external changes, but because the fundamental relationship to everything transforms. You find yourself living from a place of deep okayness even when circumstances aren't okay. You discover a peace that exists independent of conditions, a joy that requires no reason, a love that has no object because it recognizes itself in all forms. And paradoxically, even as you recognize your infinite nature, you simultaneously appreciate the preciousness of this finite expression, this particular lifetime, these specific relationships and experiences, because you see them not as obstacles to truth but as truth itself, playing in the realm of form. Every moment becomes sacred, not because it's special, but because consciousness itself is sacred, and every moment is consciousness knowing itself. This is what awaits you on the other side of seeking. Not some transcendent escape from reality, but the recognition that reality itself, exactly as it is the face of the divine looking back at you through infinite eyes. And you are those eyes. You've always been those eyes. There's no going back from this recognition. Are you ready to stop pretending otherwise? If something within you resonated with these words, if you felt that small spark of recognition in the depths of your soul, don't let this moment slip away. This wasn't just another coincidence on your path. The fact that you're here, now, encountering these words, is part of the cosmic dance of consciousness recognizing itself through countless forms. If you're tired of seeking, of feeling like you're always one step away from awakening but never quite there, this channel exists for you, not as another source of complex spiritual techniques or practices that only add more weight to your journey, but as a space of remembrance, of direct recognition of what you've always been. By subscribing, you're signaling to consciousness your willingness to awaken from the dream of separation and recognize your true nature. Each video we share here is like a mirror to your own infinite nature, a gentle reminder of truths that go beyond words, truths that can only be recognized, never learned. Also, activate the notification bell, because the moments when these messages reach you are rarely accidental. Often, the video that appears in your feed is exactly the reflection of consciousness, signaling to itself that it's ready for another level of awakening. Share this also with someone you feel is at this same threshold of recognition, someone who might need to hear that they're not alone in this journey of consciousness recognizing itself. Sometimes, a word, a different perspective is all that's needed for the shell to crack and the light of truth to flood through the fissures. And remember, you've never been separated from this truth. Every moment of seeking was consciousness playing at hiding from itself. Every moment of suffering was the invitation to awaken. Every moment of this exact now is the door through which you recognize what you've always been. There's no journey because there's nowhere to go. There's no you that needs to awaken because awakening is what you are. Simply this. Simply now. Simply consciousness recognizing itself through these eyes, through these words, through this eternal moment that never begins and never ends. You are this. You've always been this. There's no return from this truth.